Vex-Ara prided herself on being the galaxy's most efficient spirit breaker. With 4 sets of razor-sharp claws, skin that shifted from purple to black depending on her mood, and a resume that included the psychological domination of 17 different species, she was the Zephyrian Empire's go-to expert for making prisoners wish they'd never been born. The Zephyrian method was simple, elegant, and brutally effective. Step 1. Capture representatives of a species. Step 2. Break them completely using a carefully calibrated combination of psychological torture, sensory manipulation, and good old-fashioned mind games. Step 3. Broadcast the broken prisoners back to their homeworlds as a warning. Step 4. Watch entire civilizations surrender without firing a shot. It worked every time. The spider-like arachnoids had folded after watching their warriors reduced to quivering masses. The proud crystalline collective had practically begged for subjugation after seeing their philosophers babbling nonsense. Even the notoriously stubborn rock beings had crumbled when their leaders were turned into geological equivalent of nervous wrecks. So when Commander Thrak dropped a data pad containing information about something called Earth onto Vex-Ara's desk, she barely looked up from filing her claws. "Another backwater planet, Commander? How refreshing. Let me guess, they think they're special because they discovered fire or agriculture or some other adorably primitive milestone." Thrak's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his species. "This one might interest you, Vex-Ara. They call themselves humans, and our advanced scouts report some rather unusual behavioral patterns." "Unusual how? Do they worship their food? Dance before mating? Build monuments to their dead? Been there, broken that. They laugh when they're afraid." That got Vex-Ara's attention. Her skin shifted from its usual professional purple to a slightly darker shade of intrigued violet. "Excuse me?" "They also sing when they're sad, tell jokes when they're in pain, and apparently form emotional attachments to small furry creatures that serve no practical purpose." Thrak leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his considerable bulk. "Our psychological profiles suggest they might be completely insane." "Insanity is just another form of weakness, Commander. Give me 3 days with one of their specimens, and I'll have them begging to hand over their entire planet." "Excellent, because we just captured one." And that's how Vex-Ara found herself standing outside detention cell 247, reviewing the file of one Jake Morrison, age 32, the profession listed as guidance counselor, which their translation software unhelpfully defined as one who provides direction to the lost. The photo showed a creature with disgustingly symmetrical features, brown fur only on the top of his head, and what appeared to be a facial expression of mild amusement, despite being abducted by hostile aliens. "Guidance counselor," she muttered. "Perfect. I do so enjoy breaking the ones who think they can help others." Vex-Ara entered the cell with the confidence of a predator approaching wounded prey. The human sat on the standard-issue detention cube that served as furniture, looking around with what could only be described as tourist-like curiosity. "Jake Morrison," she announced, her voice carrying the precise tone of authority that had made countless beings cower. "I am Vex-Ara, and I will be conducting your psychological evaluation." The human looked up and smiled. Actually smiled. "Oh hey there, Vex-Ara, right? Cool name. Very sci-fi villain chic. I'm Jake, but you already knew that. Nice ship you've got here. Very clean. Good use of fluorescent lighting. Really brings out the whole sterile nightmare aesthetic." Vex-Ara's skin flickered between purple and black. This was not the usual response. "You will find your situation less amusing once you understand your purpose here, human." "My purpose? Ooh, existential. I like where this is going. Are we talking cosmic significance or more of a practical, day-to-day kind of thing?" "You are here to demonstrate the weakness of your species, to prove that humans, like all inferior beings, can be broken." Jake nodded thoughtfully. And then you'll show that video to Earth and expect everyone to surrender? Precisely. That's actually a pretty solid strategy. Very efficient. I respect that. One question, though. Have you tried therapy instead of galactic conquest? I mean, you guys clearly have some unresolved aggression issues. Vex-Ara decided to skip the verbal sparring and move straight to Phase 1, environmental manipulation. She dimmed the lights to near darkness and activated the fear projection system, flooding the cell with pheromones designed to trigger primal terror in most oxygen-breathing species. Jake sniffed the air. Ooh, is that lavender? No, wait. More like wet dog mixed with existential dread. Interesting choice. Really sets the mood. The fear pheromones weren't working. Vex-Ara cranked up the intensity and added subsonic frequencies that should have had the human cowering in the corner. Instead, Jake started humming along to the ominous background noise, somehow finding a melody in the carefully calibrated sounds of psychological torment. You know what this reminds me of? Jake said, apparently to himself. That time I got stuck in an elevator with my neighbor's chihuahua. Same vibe. Lots of noise, artificial environment, general sense of impending doom, but probably not as dangerous as it seems. Vex-Ara tried isolation next. She sealed Jake in a sensory deprivation chamber for 6 hours, a technique that had reduced mighty warriors to babbling infants. When she reopened the chamber, she found Jake doing what appeared to be some form of rhythmic physical movement. Oh, hey again. I was just working on my interpretive dance routine. Want to see? It's called Ode to Floating in a Dark Box. Very avant-garde. What is wrong with you? Vex-Ara demanded. Clinically? Mild anxiety, slight tendency toward overthinking, and what my dentist calls aggressive plaque buildup. Why, is there something specific you were looking for? That's when Commander Thrak arrived for his first progress check. He took one look at Jake, who was now attempting to teach the maintenance robots to harmonize with his off-key rendition of something called Bohemian Rhapsody, and turned to Vex-Ara with an expression that suggested profound disappointment. How long has he been singing? 4 hours, 17 minutes, and 36 seconds, Vex-Ara replied through gritted teeth. I've tried everything in the standard protocol. And? Then he rated my fear pheromones 3 out of 10 for creativity and suggested I try incorporating more citrus notes next time. Thrak watched as Jake high-fived one of the cleaning robots. Perhaps you need to try harder, Vex-Ara. Our timeline for the Earth invasion depends on breaking this specimen quickly. As Thrak left, Jake called after him, Nice meeting you, Commander. Love what you've done with the whole intimidating military leader thing. Very authoritative. Have you considered a career in middle management? Vex-Ara decided that subtlety was clearly wasted on humans. She moved to advanced techniques, starting with the nightmare simulation chamber. This device could tap into a subject's subconscious fears and manifest them as terrifyingly real hallucinations. The crystalline collective's leaders had emerged from it completely catatonic. She strapped Jake into the neural interface and activated the system. Through the monitoring screen, she watched his dream self being chased by massive predators, falling from impossible heights, and facing scenarios designed to trigger every possible phobia. When she pulled him out 3 hours later, Jake looked thoughtful. That was wild. I was being chased by this giant spider, right? But then I realized it was probably just trying to make friends. So I stopped running and asked if it wanted to grab coffee. Turns out it was actually really insecure about its web-spinning abilities. We had a great chat about artistic expression and the pressure to live up to family expectations. You befriended your nightmare? Well, yeah, it was clearly dealing with some self-esteem issues. Did you know that in many cultures, spiders are symbols of creativity and feminine power? Very empowering stuff. Vex-Ara tried temporal displacement next, trapping Jake in a time loop where he experienced the same terrifying moment over and over, When she finally released him, she expected to find him driven mad by repetition. Instead, Jake had somehow turned the time loop into an opportunity to perfect his stand-up comedy routine. So there I was, same moment, over and over, and I thought, hey, free practice time. By loop number 47, I really had the timing down on this bit about alien abduction support groups. Want to hear it? No, Vexara said quickly. Okay, but you're missing out. It involves a really great impression of what I imagine you guys sound like when you're trying to be scary. That night, Vexara found herself doing something she'd never done before, researching her subject. The human database made for disturbing reading. Humans, it seemed, had a documented history of finding humor in the face of disaster, forming communities during crises, and somehow thriving in conditions that should have destroyed them. They had survived ice ages by telling stories around fires. They had endured plagues by writing songs about them. They had faced extinction-level events and somehow turned them into opportunities for growth and learning. This is impossible, Vexara muttered, scrolling through accounts of humans who had laughed at their own executions, cracked jokes while their cities burned, and somehow found ways to maintain hope in the most hopeless situations. The next morning, Jake greeted her with his usual inexplicable cheerfulness. Morning, Vex. You look tired. Rough night. I've got some great relaxation techniques if you're interested. Why? Vexara demanded. Why aren't you broken? Why aren't you begging for mercy? Why are you trying to help me? Jake considered this seriously. Well, you seem stressed. And I figure if you're less stressed, maybe you'll be less likely to, psychologically torture me. It's basically enlightened self-interest with a side of basic human decency. Human decency. Yeah, it's this weird thing we do where we try to treat others well even when they're not treating us well. Probably sounds crazy to someone in the galactic conquest business, but it works for us. By the end of the week, word had spread throughout the facility about the unkillable human in cell 247. Other staff members started finding excuses to walk by just to see the creature that had stumped Vexara. Some reported that Jake had somehow learned their names and had started offering career advice through the cell bars. Commander Thrak was getting impatient, and Vexara's reputation was beginning to suffer. She had to do something drastic. Desperate times called for desperate measures. If conventional torture wasn't working, maybe unconventional conversation would reveal some exploitable weakness. Vexara began spending longer periods in Jake's cell, ostensibly for extended psychological evaluation. Tell me about your homeworld, she commanded, settling onto the detention cube across from him. Earth? Oh man, where do I even start? It's this amazing blue and green marble floating in space, right? We've got these massive oceans, and mountains that scrape the sky and deserts that stretch forever. But the best part is the people. The people are your planet's greatest strength? Vexara couldn't hide her skepticism. Absolutely, we're weird, Vex. Like really weird. We keep small animals in our homes just because they're cute. We plant flowers that serve no practical purpose because they're pretty. We make art about our feelings and music about our breakups. We cry at movies about fictional characters. Jake had started drawing on the cell walls using some kind of improvised chalk made from food rations and cleaning supplies. The images were crude but somehow expressive, showing stick figures holding hands, laughing, sharing meals. This is emotional support, Jake explained, adding tiny hearts around the figures. When humans feel bad, other humans help them feel better. It's like a built-in repair system for sadness. That sounds inefficient, Vexara observed, though she found herself studying the drawings with more interest than she cared to admit. Super inefficient, Jake agreed cheerfully, but it works. Like my friend Amy, she makes terrible coffee. I mean, really awful stuff, but when I'm having a bad day, she shows up with her terrible coffee and tells me jokes until I feel better. And then when she's having a bad day, I make her my actually good coffee and listen to her complain about her ex-boyfriend for 3 hours. This Amy person sounds like a liability. Amy's the best. She once drove 400 miles just to bring me soup when I had the flu. Completely irrational behavior. Cost her a whole weekend and probably $50 in gas money. But that's what friends do. Vexara found herself asking questions she'd never asked before. Do all humans have these friends? Most of us, yeah, family too. People who care about us just because we exist, not because we're useful or powerful or anything like that. Jake glanced at her curiously. Do Zephyrians have friends? We have allies. Strategic partnerships. Mutually beneficial arrangements. That sounds lonely. The word hit Vexara like a physical blow. Lonely. She'd never had a term for the hollow feeling she carried, the sense that despite being surrounded by colleagues and subordinates, she was fundamentally isolated. Her success had always been individual, her achievements measured against others' failures. I am not lonely, she said automatically. I am efficient, focused, superior. Sure, but are you happy? It was such a simple question, but Vexara found herself unable to answer. Happy? When was the last time she'd felt anything resembling happiness? When had she last looked forward to something, or felt joy, or experienced the satisfaction that came from connection rather than dominance? Jake seemed to sense her confusion. You know what we should do? Talent show. I bet there are tons of hidden talents on this ship. Maybe that maintenance robot can tap dance. Maybe Commander Thrak writes poetry. Maybe you can sing. That is the most ridiculous suggestion I've ever heard. Come on, it'll be fun. When's the last time you had fun, Vex? The question haunted her for days. Fun. Another concept that seemed foreign, almost dangerous. Fun served no strategic purpose. Fun made you vulnerable. Fun was for species that hadn't mastered the art of galactic domination. But somehow Jake's enthusiasm was infectious. Before she quite knew what was happening, Vexara found herself mentioning the talent show idea to other staff members. To her surprise, several showed interest. The maintenance chief admitted he composed symphonies using engine harmonics. A security guard revealed her skill at zero-gravity ballet. Within a week, Cell Block C had been transformed into an impromptu performance space, and beings who had never spoken to each other outside of professional duties were rehearsing together, sharing stories and laughing. Actual laughing. On a military vessel, during an active psychological warfare operation. Commander Thrak was not pleased. Explain to me, Commander Thrak said, his voice dangerously quiet. Why my detention facility sounds like a recreational center and battle. Why my most experienced interrogator is apparently organizing entertainment events with the prisoner she was supposed to break 3 weeks ago. Vexara stood at attention in Thrak's office, very aware that her career hung by a thread thinner than spider silk. Commander, I believe I'm close to a breakthrough. The human psychological defenses are unlike anything we've encountered, but I've identified potential weaknesses in their social bonding mechanisms. Social bonding mechanisms? Yes, sir. Humans derive their strength from connections with others. By integrating myself into his social framework, I can identify the precise points where maximum psychological damage can be inflicted. It sounded convincing, even to her own ears. The truth was more complicated. The truth was that she genuinely enjoyed talking to Jake, looked forward to their sessions, and had started thinking of him less as a subject and more as, well, a friend. One more week, Vexara. If you haven't produced results by then, I'm replacing you with Specialist Crick Snore, and your career in psychological operations will be over. Specialist Crick Snore was known for his efficiency and his complete lack of imagination. He would probably have Jake broken within hours using methods that would leave the human a hollow shell of himself. The thought made Vexara's skin shift to a sickly yellow color she didn't recognize. That evening, she arrived at Jake's cell with a piece of equipment she'd never used before, the memory extractor. It was designed to forcibly access a subject's deepest traumas and project them as realistic holograms, creating a feedback loop of terror and despair. "Wow, that's some serious-looking hardware," Jake observed. "Let me guess, this is the part where you rifle through my brain looking for my worst memories?" "The memory extractor will display your greatest fears and most traumatic experiences until your psychological defenses collapse completely." "Huh. And then you'll broadcast that to Earth?" "Yes." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "You know, Vex, I've been thinking. You're really not cut out for the whole evil torturer thing. I am the most successful psychological warfare specialist in the Empire." "Maybe, but you're terrible at being mean to me specifically. Like, really bad at it. You keep asking how I'm feeling and whether I'm comfortable. Yesterday you brought me extra food because you thought I looked thin. That's not exactly fear-inducing behavior." Vex Ara activated the memory extractor, hoping to end this conversation before Jake could voice any more uncomfortable truths. The machine hummed to life, its neural probes extending toward Jake's head. But something went wrong. Instead of extracting traumatic memories, the machine began broadcasting Jake's thoughts and experiences as a three-dimensional holographic display that filled the cell. And what it showed wasn't trauma or fear or weakness. It showed Jake as a child comforting a friend who had been bullied. Jake as a teenager, volunteering at a homeless shelter. Jake as an adult, sitting with a student who was struggling with depression, offering patience and understanding and hope. The hologram showed humans helping each other through disasters, caring for the sick, protecting the vulnerable, finding reasons to laugh even in the darkest times. It showed communities coming together, strangers becoming friends, and people choosing kindness over cruelty again and again and again and again. "This is what we are," Jake said softly, watching his own memories play out around them. "We're not the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced species in the universe. But we're the species that looks at suffering and says, 'How can I help?' We're the species that finds beauty in broken things and hope in hopeless situations." Vex Ara stared at the holographic display, feeling something crack open inside her chest. For the first time in her life, she was seeing what it looked like to live in a world where strength came from connection, where power meant lifting others up instead of tearing them down. "Your whole strategy is based on a fundamental misunderstanding," Jake continued. "You can't break humans by hurting us individually because we're not individuals. We're part of something bigger. Every human you break just makes the rest of us more determined to prove that kindness is stronger than cruelty, that hope is more powerful than fear." The hologram shifted to show Earth as Jake remembered it. Cities full of light and laughter, families sharing meals, children playing in parks, strangers helping strangers for no reason other than it was the right thing to do. "This is why you'll never conquer Earth, Vex. Because you're trying to fight an idea, and ideas can't be broken. They can only be replaced by better ideas." Commander Thrak chose that moment to arrive for his final evaluation, expecting to find a broken human and a successful demonstration. Instead, he found Vex Ara sitting in stunned silence while holographic humans danced around the cell, showing each other kindness and joy and unconditional love. The silence in cell 247 stretched for what felt like years. Commander Thrak stared at the holographic display of human compassion, while Vex Ara experienced what she would later learn to call an existential crisis. "Well," Thrak said finally, "this is unexpected." Jake had been watching Vex Ara's face during the memory playback, and something in her expression had shifted. The predatory confidence was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like wonder. "Commander," Jake said, addressing Thrak directly for the first time, "I think we need to talk. The prisoner does not address me directly. The prisoner has a name, and the prisoner has been studying your psychological profiles for 3 weeks while pretending to be broken. Did you really think a guidance counselor wouldn't notice behavioral patterns?" That got everyone's attention. Vex-Ara's skin flickered rapidly between colors. You've been analyzing us. It's literally my job. I help people work through their problems, and buddy, you folks have some serious problems. It's classic symptoms of a hierarchical society built on dominance and fear, with deep-seated insecurity masked by aggression and an almost pathological need to prove superiority. Jake stood up and began pacing the small cell, his movements confident and purposeful. The whole galactic conquest thing? That's not about building an empire. That's about validation. You need other species to surrender because deep down you're terrified that you might not actually be superior at all. That's ridiculous, Thrak sputtered. Is it? When's the last time your species created something beautiful just because it was beautiful? When did you last help someone who couldn't help you back? When did you last feel joy? The questions hit like physical blows. Vex-Ara realized she couldn't answer any of them. Here's the thing about humans, Jake continued, his voice taking on the gentle authority of someone who had spent years helping people understand themselves. We figured out a long time ago that the strongest societies aren't built on fear. They're built on trust, on cooperation, on the radical idea that everyone deserves dignity and respect regardless of their power or usefulness. Weakness, Thrak muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Let me tell you what happens when you attack Earth. You'll face 6 billion people who have spent their entire evolutionary history learning how to work together, who have built civilizations based on the idea that everyone matters, who will fight not because they hate you, but because they love each other. Jake gestured to the holographic memories still playing around them. Every human you kill will make the rest of us more determined. Every city you destroy will be rebuilt better than before. Every act of cruelty will be met with 10 acts of kindness, because that's who we are. Vex-Ara found her voice. But surely some humans would surrender. Some would collaborate. Oh, absolutely. Humans aren't perfect. We're scared and flawed, and we make terrible decisions all the time. But even our worst humans usually draw the line at letting bullies hurt people they care about. And humans care about a lot of people. The truth of it settled over the cell like a weight. Thrak was beginning to look like a commander who had just realized his entire strategy was fundamentally flawed. There's another way, Jake said quietly. Instead of conquest, try cooperation. Instead of dominance, try partnership. I bet there are things humans could teach Zephyrians and things Zephyrians could teach humans. Imagine what we could build together instead of what you could destroy alone. It was Vex-Ara who spoke first. The Council would never approve such a radical change in policy. The Council doesn't have to know, Jake replied with a smile. Your report could say that humans are psychologically unbreakable and recommend against invasion due to unacceptable casualty projections. But completely true, strategically sound, and it buys time for cooler heads to prevail. Thrak and Vex-Ara exchanged glances. It was a reasonable solution that would save face while preventing a war neither of them now believed could be won. And what do you get out of this arrangement, human? Thrak asked suspiciously. I get to go home to terrible coffee and interpretive dance lessons and friends who drive 400 miles to bring me soup when I'm sick. And you get to avoid learning why humans are so good at making friends. Which is mayors. We practice on everyone, even on alien captors who are trying to break our spirits. Vex-Ara looked around at the cell that had become less like a prison and more like a therapy session. Jake, that first day when I told you why you were here, you weren't surprised. Nope, I volunteered. You volunteered to be abducted and tortured? I volunteered to be the test case. My government figured if anyone could handle alien psychological warfare, it would be someone trained in human psychological support. Plus, I was curious about what makes a species think conquest is a good idea. And what's your professional assessment? Jake grinned. severe emotional constipation with a side of chronic validation deficit, but totally treatable with the right therapeutic approach. 3 months later, detention cell 247 had been converted into the first interspecies cultural exchange center. Vexara had submitted her resignation from psychological warfare and enrolled in what humans called social work training. Commander Thrak had quietly reassigned the Earth invasion fleet to extended cultural observation duty. And Jake Morrison, guidance counselor turned accidental diplomatic revolutionary, was finally heading home with a folder full of pen pal addresses and a standing invitation to return for the first annual Zephyrian Human Friendship Festival. As his transport prepared for departure, Vexara approached him one last time. "Jake, thank you." "For what?" "For showing me what it looks like to be strong without being cruel. For teaching me that breaking things is easier than building them, but building them is infinitely more satisfying." Jake smiled and offered her something she'd seen in the holographic memories but never experienced herself: a hug. "That's what friends do, Vex. They help each other become better versions of themselves." As the transport disappeared into hyperspace, Vexara reflected on the most important lesson she'd learned from humanity. Sometimes the greatest victory comes not from conquering your enemies, but from discovering you don't need enemies at all. The galaxy had just become a much more interesting place.